I'd like to thank Sinn Féin for bringing this motion here today. We know it's in advance of the legislation coming to the House and being discussed in detail. But given the way legislation has been debated through the House over the course of the last few months, we don't know how much time we're actually going to get to discuss legislation in detail, particularly when we get to amendments. So any opportunity we get to discuss housing and to discuss the provisions of a bill, albeit before having the exact full details, should be welcomed and is welcomed by the Labour Party. So thanks to Deputy O'Brien Sinn Féin for bringing this. The previous Deputy just launched a charge at Minister O'Brien saying that this is a revert to type for Fianna Fáil. That is a very wounding charge, because the roots of this housing crisis are in the collapsed economy of 2008, which is when our entire economy was leveraged against the construction industry. When the housing industry failed, everything fell with it, and that's why we have a housing crisis now. We have not to this point, 13 years on from that crash, nearly 13 years on from that crash, been able to get ahead of this housing crisis and beat this housing crisis. And in my first contribution on housing in this Dáil with Minister O'Brien in his new role, I said that there was two Fianna Fáil legacies that the Minister will have to decide between. The traditional Fianna Fáil legacy, which they pride themselves on in terms of building local authority housing at a great scale and creating communities throughout the country, not just throughout Dublin, but throughout the country. They weren't the only party to do that back in the mid-20th century, but they do have a proud tradition on that. Or will it be the legacy of the late 90s and early noughties, which led ultimately to where we are now, and the housing crisis and the homelessness crisis? Now, it is still premature to make that judgment, because, as we say, the LDA bill, the bill hasn't been brought before us. But the shared equity scheme, as is being presented, is a genuine cause for concern. And I know the Minister will say that the opposition are being dogmatic and not being fair, etc., and that it is unsurprising that they're against it. Well, maybe it's not unsurprising that opposition are going to be against a scheme or have questions regarding a scheme. But as has been said, it's not just opposition parties that are against this or have questions over this, and very serious questions. We do have, as was mentioned, the ESRI. We have the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. In the motion itself, Sinn Féin quote the House of Commons' own PAC and their concerns over shared equity schemes. And when you have Sinn Féin quoting reports from a House of Parliament, I think you need to sit up and take notice that maybe there is some genuine questions here that need to be tackled, answered and resolved in advance of this legislation being brought to the House in its proper form. The tone of debate around housing also has to change. We need to be focusing on policy, which is why I welcome, and why the Labour Party welcomes, this opportunity to talk about this policy. There is an increasingly overly personalised element to the debate between the Minister and the senior spokesperson, Deputy O'Brien from Sinn Féin, which I think needs to end. I think this issue is too important. People have been contacting my office who are unaligned, as far as I can see, to any party or any campaign, but have concerns about the shared equity scheme on a number of different levels, but particularly seeing this as a developer's charter. And Minister, you and I both represent the same constituency. We represent the same people who are having the same experience. And it is the youngest constituency in the state. We know the levels of negative equity that existed, the impact of the crash. Go down the line, we had the pyrite crisis was so heavily focused in Fingal. So there's an awful lot of damaged psychology in relation to the housing market in our own constituency as well as around the country. So getting this right and getting an affordable housing scheme right is so important. And for constituencies like ours, young constituencies with young people who've been renting for a long period of time, who may have cobbled together a deposit. The majority have not. But they need something to hope for, and they are genuinely concerned about this. Inequality in this country is growing, and it's growing at a rate that will take decades to reverse if we do not do something now. The wealthiest 20% in Ireland have a median wealth of €835,000. per household. The poorest 20% only have a median wealth of €1,000. Now, the higher figure of 835,000 is up from 560,000 in 2013. That's still an eye-watering figure for so many people. The reason it has increased is because house prices have increased. 70% of all household wealth or home ownership wealth is held with people over 50 years of age. 70%. So this wealth, these 20% of the wealthiest people, the 70% of household wealth is with older people. It's not with younger people. They are frozen out, they are locked out, and they are not able to get in, and they have genuine concerns about being able to get in here. The reason being that there's no measures in relation to affordability and what defines affordability. There's a concern that developers will be selling this, and Minister, we know a few estates have been built in our constituency, and I'm sure this is reflective of other constituencies, whereby the first phase will be built. The houses will be generally generous in size. They will be just about slightly above affordability, but maybe just about affordable. But as the subsequent phases are built, the houses become smaller, the prices become higher, and further planning applications go in for to change densities, etc. When people's eyes are off the ball and the original application has been done. That's what happens when developers are allowed to control a market or control affordability. The houses get smaller, the prices get bigger. An affordable scheme has to tackle that at root, and this doesn't seem to do that. And the concerns coming from PER, coming from ESRI, coming from the voices in the UK, coming from voices here, coming from opposition, coming from people who really want to see an affordable housing scheme work, like ourselves, but we do have genuine concerns here. And the issue in relation to wealth and wealth inequality, if an individual wants to play the capitalist game and go into the stock market and buy 1,000 shares in a multinational company, that's their prerogative. They can go and do that, and they can deal with that decision themselves. But they're not going in and taking 1,000 shares out of the pockets of young people looking to buy a home or needing a home. But when an investor or someone with that wealth, that top 20%, goes into a market and buys a house from it at an inflated price that only they can afford because the developer sets it, and they have their wealth in the bank, they've accumulated it through home ownership in over previous decades. That intergenerational wealth transfer only serves to fix that inequality. And according to the OECD, it'll take 5 generations from an Irish person descended from the bottom 20% of income. 5 generations, 150 years, just to be able to afford a home. That's compared to 2 generations in Denmark. It shouldn't take any generations. People with a decent wage, using the Minister's own words, people with a decent wage should be able to afford a decent home. That's not the case now. And the problem is, if we don't solve this, if this affordable housing scheme does not work, and we don't think it will in what we're hearing and what we're seeing in its current form, then we're looking at 150 years for anyone who's at the bottom 20% to ever to be able to afford a home. And in the absence of a local authority house building programme of any great scale, that is an incredibly bleak and grim outlook for people that just want a roof over their head and need a roof over their heads. So, Minister, you have staked your political reputation on affordable housing. You wanted this ministry, you represent the constituency, as I do, that wants to see affordable housing, that needs to see affordable housing. We want to support affordable housing, we really do, and we will look at the merits of every piece of legislation as it comes down. But we are genuinely concerned about what we're seeing here. There is elements in this motion from Sinn Féin that need to be examined. In fairness to them, they have articulated all the questions from all the various different actors, both in this state and abroad, as to why there's genuine concerns about this. We cannot go back to a developer's charter. We need to put people first, the people that need housing, and they need to have a scheme that is going to deliver for them, that's going to deliver for communities, and that is going to tackle this wealth inequality that is rooted in home ownership that exists right now. And if that's not unwound as soon as possible, that inequality will only get deeper, grow greater, and have a negative and damaging impact on generations of Irish people to come. Thank you, and thank the proposers of the motion.